Nicole, you ever hear the one about Superman and Wonder Woman?
No, I don't think I have.
So, Superman's flying around Metropolis one day, and when he spots Wonder Woman lying absolutely butt naked, suntanning on the roof of the Justice League building, and he starts thinking to
Uh-huh.
himself, I'm faster than a speeding bullet. I could fly right down there, take care of business, and be gone before she can blink an eye. So he swoops in, does his thing, disappears into the sky. Wonder Woman senses a commotion. She cries out, "What was that?" The Invisible Man says, "I don't know, but all of a sudden my ass hurts."
God damn it. I knew I shouldn't fucking agree to do this fucking podcast. I'm just fucking too nice sometimes. Oh fuck, we're recording. Oh god damn it. You know what? Just
We're
start the
recording?
theme music. Yeah, fucking just whatever. Miguel?
Have you ever seen the Dilbert 3 video? That
No.
famous C-Boy-RD flash animation where Dilbert does a
No,
mass
but I was
shooting.
rocking out to this Game Boy title theme because it's very poppy. The first few seconds of it doesn't sound like it would be the song for a Robocop video game. It's not that. It's not
it's
like
very
Basil
melancholy.
Calderis's.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, it's there's a guy, Jonathan Dunn. He worked for a company called Ocean Interactive in the 80s and 90s, and all they did was just like really mid-tier licensed shovelware, but he just composed incredible music for all of them.
That's
But yeah,
that's
if you
nice.
anyone listening probably recognizes that music that I assume they heard edited in there from the famous C Boyardee flash animation Dilbert 3. It's what's playing in the background as Dilbert shoots up his office.
And speaking of horrific violence, we're taking a break from talking about Marvel movies or really any comic book movies today, and we decided to treat ourselves. So this is our first official episode of the sub-series that we are calling Watch Something Else exclusively. So we're doing a Paul Verhoeven retrospective.
Yes, there's the you may know him best as a very well regarded Dutch Christ scholar, but he has also done some work in film, believe it or not.
Yeah, as recently as this year, he made the horniest goddamn Catholic movie since Ken Russell's The Devils, Benedetta, which is just perfect. But we've watched a bunch of Verhoeven movies within like the past week and a half. Me, I've rewatched Starship Troopers, Robocop. I also watched for the very first time Flesh and Blood, which is his first English Hollywood, or at least his first American movie. And I also got to watch Hollow Man for the first time, which is his last Hollywood movie and widely regarded as his worst film, or at least not a very good movie. But I kind of delighted in it. But let's sort of
I
get
think
to
it's
sort of how we've determined very early on that Paul Verhoeven is the absolute inverse of what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going for. He is the anti-MCU.
yeah, his in terms of the Hollywood, which we're kind of narrowing our focus to, the Hollywood blockbuster genre action movies he made. his movies are deceptively flashy and superficial with a substance and critique underneath. Whereas I would say the Marvel movies want to invite the appearance of having critiques and substance when they are in fact actually very superficial, like a shallow reflective pool, versus a puddle that like looks like it's an inch deep and then you step in it and goes up to your knee.
Or if you really want to pull straws, you kneel in the like very shallow puddle and then claim it's a lot deeper than it actually is, which is what fandom feeds into.
It's that's one of those things I want to explore through the series as we go on is the mechanism where Disney primes the pump kind of with all of these clickbaity, oh, this movie's going to have queer themes, or this one's going to be about this or that. And then it's like barely there in the movie unless you really project it onto it. But it's,
that's going to be when eventually we have to do shit like Captain Marvel or even Black Panther. I imagine that's going to be very fun to look at. But no, we've already mentioned Paul Verhoeven several times on this podcast. He was he's a very formative figure, I guess, in both of our viewing habits.
Oh, absolutely. In particular, I grew up watching a lot of Total Recall on tape, which is just. I feel like it says a lot about my childhood that like I grew up, and I mean grew up not like my teen years, I mean from like toddler age. I grew up watching this outrageously violent, horny movie.
Yeah. And that's you've hit the nail on the head, because if you can define what Verhoeven's movies are, or if he's known for really anything, it is gratuitous sex and just a shockingly brutal amount of violence.
No, nobody gets shot like they get shot in a Verhoeven movie. People just get turned into Swiss cheese and ripped to fucking apart, to pieces. They get stabbed, they get gutted. And that really has a lot to do, I suppose, with Paul Verhoeven having grown up during World War II. So he's Dutch, and as a child, he lived in The Hague near a German military base during World War II. And his parents nearly died in an Allied bombing that he remembers seeing horrible things during, like dead bodies in the street. And this obviously had a impact on how he would approach not only depicting violence in movies, but just what he sees as this real tangible force it needs to have in order to really grab at an audience. Someone I was watching, I think it was either one of the makings of Robocop documentaries or at least one sort of behind the scene material featurette. Someone referred to his depiction of violence as very cynical and unblinking. But I would also add it is very shocking and it has a very tangible impact and weight to it. It is like very, very much so, which I think is one of the mirror parallels to Marvel movies and a lot of blockbusters in general, and I mean, like, obviously, like a comic book movie is not going to be a hard R rating, but just a general lack of texture and impact.
Like, imagine if Thanos ripped apart people the way the bugs do in Starship Troopers. Just fucking imagine. You don't see dead bodies. You don't see limbs ripped apart. You don't see that level of violence in any of the pristine Marvel movies. You can't. The worst that happens is someone, they get shot and they fall down. Or they fall off a building, that sort of Disney death, but there is no viscera to it. It's Paul Verhoeven just delights in it and delights in shooting it.
There's a real, like, I haven't seen his old, like his pre-Hollywood European stuff, but like what's said about it is that like the really intense violence and that wasn't in those, and it was something that that kind of came out with his Hollywood stuff. And I have a theory. I think one that's reasonably well founded, but I haven't found like a direct quote backing it up.
Okay.
Is that there's a part of it, I think, and this I kind of picked up from like the Robocop commentary and stuff, is like an idea that like, well, no, when we depict war and violence, it should be brutal and horrifying.
Yeah.
In the Robocop commentary, Ed Neumeyer, the one of the writers, and then who'd write Starship Troopers, describes him as a humanist, which I think checks out really like philosophically. But I think that dovetails with a kind of that sort of satirical and critical streak that runs through his movies, where he just says this outright. He says he was so shocked when he came to start making movies in America at how violent America as a country was, how widespread gun ownership was. And
oh yeah,
there's, I think, also like this is like, oh, you like your violence, here's your violence like reflected back at you, like excessive to the point of being satirical, like you know, that kind of funhouse mirror sort of thing.
Well, as a outsider, you know, he's the Mad Dutchman. He's a European, again, has this background of having literally witnessed World War II with his own two eyes as a child. Like, that shit is very formative. He's able to really, and in this almost anthropological manner, diagnose violence as something that is very much an acutely American enterprise and something that the culture actively consumes as a product as much as it enacts against others. And the other thing I'd say Verhoeven is just known for is how he uses genre films and genre tropes to embed a social and political critique in. I think in another one of the Robocop behind the scenes I had watched, he flat out said, like, I'm not a political person, but what I do is I just try to reflect what's going on in the culture at the time. And I just think of that because the other thing he's sort of stylistically known for, appears more like Robocop and Starship Troopers, are these little news or PSA stingers. They're like in-universe sort of parodies of
those, I
commercials.
think, can be attributed a lot to Ed Neumeyer.
Yeah.
In particular. Although Total Recall has a lot of that too. The diegetic kind of exposition that also kind of doubles as kind of a level, the most heightened level of satire and parody.
It's also like world building, and it's very uniquely Verhoeven-esque, like his use of media and like news and just content, and how he just uses that to flesh out those worlds that he brings us into is very, very, very unique, especially now that everything in our culture has to be not just a commodity, but it's like content. Like, we are now getting constant advertisements asking us if we want to see more, but it's not trying to recruit us to fight like a intergalactic bug war. It's hailing us to take this stupid fucking BuzzFeed quiz to find out which Avenger you are. So Verhoeven is also very prescient in the movies that he made during his Hollywood heyday. Like, he was a filmmaker truly at the end of history. It really kind of, in retrospect, doesn't surprise me that after Hollow Man, he was like, I'm fucking out. Bye. He knew, I think he kind of sort of saw the tide the culture was going in. In
the Robocop commentary, they're like watching some of the stuff happen in the movie, and Neumeyer says, like, you could never get this through a studio development process now. And that was in like, I don't know, 2000. I think that commentary was recorded in like 2001 or 2.
Yeah, there have been
a lot
bunch.
of references to the being in the Bush era, which none of them are very happy about. But I think like the reason, he probably left Hollywood was he couldn't get, I don't know if I'd say he couldn't get work, but couldn't get like work that he was interested in. Like even all the way back then, like they're starting to tighten everything up. And after that spate, like I remember there was that little sort of like post Scream, there was a few years where they made like R-rated horror movies again.
Mm-hmm.
But then like particularly after 9/11, everything had to be PG-13, right? Like that was when we got like those, a lot of, and I mean like the Robocop and Total Recall remakes are PG-13, that Alien versus Predator was like just everything that 10, 20 years ago would have been like an R-rated genre film.
It's so sanitized now.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Sanitized.
I was going to say neutered, but that's maybe a better term. And I think that's, like where's a guy like that, can fit in.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was definitely thinking. And I guess this is sort of where we can start going more chronologically through the timeline. That was just my entire thought process watching Flesh and Blood, which was his first official American movie, is literally a movie about flesh and blood. It is a very grimy, dirty, depressing movie about medieval depravity. It's nasty
movie.
It's a rape movie, people. It is a movie about rape
so much.
And pillaging and dead babies and having to use your sexuality to get the fuck out of life or death situations. And it is also about how Rutger Hauer and Paul Verhoeven apparently had a major falling out during the production of this movie, because I guess they had collaborated on a bunch of his early Dutch movies.
Yeah, they'd made a Dutch series called Floris, which was somewhat in a similar vein, where it was about like a medieval mercenary, I think. And according to like the Wikipedia and those like, behind the scenes tidbits, articles and stuff, Rutger Hauer wanted to transition into heroic good guy roles, and he is not a good guy in this movie.
Rutger Hauer is he's a rapist. He's a literal rapist. But you kind of understand the charisma behind him too. That's a very much a strength that Paul Verhoeven has. Even the slimiest characters have some sort of appeal to him. Like we're not going to talk about Showgirls, maybe on probably a future Verhoeven retrospective, but like even Kyle MacLachlan's character, he's so slimy, but it's that sliminess that really makes him so interesting to watch, because it's very against the type that he was fucking the Eagle Scout, grown FBI Eagle Scout on Twin Peaks. So yeah, Rutger Hauer is just he's raping and pillaging and being a false god, prophet.
Well, I mean that's like the Christianity stuff so often makes its way into his movies, and with this one, it's very much like all through the Middle Ages, like all these and beyond, all these people fighting these horrible wars and these horrible things found a way to convince themselves that what they were doing was God's will, even though it was like entirely brutal and self-serving. And I'm not a historian expert, but I've read a bit. I know a little bit of history, and
you just need to know that this age was terrible to be a fucking woman in. That's basically all you need to know.
But like at the beginning of the movie, like the Rutger Hauer's mercenary group are promised like this guy's like retaking his city he has a claim to, and he's like, if you get 24 hours of looting, because yet they haven't been paid, and that's what motivates them, and that includes just the women, like everything. And then he turns around and decides that it's not worth the cost of having his own city looted, and then kicks them out at Cannon Point, and they kind of set out to get their revenge, and Rutger Hauer's character, because of a series of coincidences, they unearth his patron saint in the ruins of a cathedral where they're hiding out, and they're mad uh, monk that accompanies them as a kind of chaplain starts interpreting it as a sign, and he becomes this kind of prophet figure. But like that was how it worked. Like the around the time period the movie says 1501 is when Rome was sacked in the Italian Wars by the I think it was the army of the Holy Roman Emperor, which, I mean, armies back then consisted like very heavily of mercenaries. It was like a whole subcontracting operation. You'd send your guys out to hire some mercenaries. They'd go and find their guys, who'd find their guys, who'd get a few guys here together, and it would all kind of coalesce. And that's what you did. Like they'd go months without getting paid because your finances are so strained by war.
Yeah, it's
and
very
then
much
you just
also,
promised them like you can just loot the city, and that's your payment. And it really was like that. Like that's pretty historically accurate. Actually,
and that's another thing Verhoeven is very good about, depicting just how much money and wealth really is integral to power. Like here, that's the whole catalyst is about money being shuffled around. Like this greedy guy promising his mercenaries all the wealth they can take within their hands, and then last minute being like, actually no. And then they kidnap his son's betrothed, who's, you know, as a virgin, she has a monetary value. Women had dowries back then. Like, women were a commodity essentially back then. If you didn't have a dowry, you were sent to the fucking nunnery and paid your shit that way.
And not just any old commodity, but like a mechanism to bind families together into networks of relations that functioned as like mechanisms of diplomacy and alliance and inheritance, but very much instruments. And Jennifer Jason Leigh, the way her character in this movie like is kind of like whichever guy she's sort of forced to pair up with, she starts. I feel like seducing is like half right, but incomplete.
Seducing, she does. But like she does, I guess, what people say is very similar to what's the character on Game of Thrones, Sansa. Kind of what that character does, having to adapt to the circumstances.
Yeah, because it's very much like winning over the most, you know, whether it's the
getting on the side of the most powerful person in the room, and if that means, you know, whoring yourself out, so fucking be it.
And you see that played out during the rape scene when like the whole camp is gonna have their way with her, and then Rutger Hauer comes in and
tips
and
over,
then like
something starts a fire to distract them, and that, you know, if she's under his protection, she's not going to get fucked with by anyone else.
Exactly. And she can leverage herself a better position status wise and influence. But like before that, when he's in process, she kind of turns things around on him a bit, like because there's a scene earlier.
I'll take you. She says,
yeah, exactly.
I'll take you.
I found that like fascinating. Like that was very interesting and very much like with like within the context of that world. Like that's how women leveraged what power they had.
Yeah. It sucked being a lady back in the day is basically what Flesh and Blood tells us. The other thing I really got out of this was just as it sort of previews the level of scale that Verhoeven would later work with in his Hollywood features. Again, this is his first American and English language movie. They don't make grandiose medieval epics like this.
This movie didn't have that huge a budget. Actually, it was Orion. It was, I think, like $6 million. Not like not like a little indie movie, but for a historical epic, like a pretty modest budget, like that's probably like 15 million.
$6.5 million it says, and it only made like $100,000 at the U.S. box office, so it did not turn.
Oh yeah, it was a huge
profit.
flop, and I could see like the Reagan era audience just like not knowing how to make heads or tails of this movie, because it goes harder than like anything in Game of Thrones does. Even more so on that amorality, kind of everybody's bad because they're in bad circumstances. And I feel like George R.R. Martin must have seen this movie too. There's too many little things. But I mean, you could also you could see strains of that running through like Conan the Barbarian and
Berserk.
Yeah. In an interview, Kentaro Miura says that in particular Guts' design was inspired by Martin, Rutger Hauer's character in the movie, but it's also like just the tone and setting of Berserk and the enormous amount of sexual violence, at least in the first half or so of its run. Even just like the stuff with the mercenaries, certain plot elements, like it all. I think it must have been pretty formative, even if subconsciously he didn't realize how much. It probably shaped the feature, but it's very I was watching it and I'd forgotten I'd read that interview, and I was thinking to myself, God, this reminds me a lot of Berserk. Like it's if you've read Berserk and you watch this movie, like you'll see it like very clearly. You don't need to squint.
But I'd say, well, this isn't my favorite Verhoeven movie. I quite liked it, but this is, I guess, most importantly to our conversation, Flesh and Blood was really the stepping stone towards Verhoeven making RoboCop, because this is he did Flesh and Blood with Orion, and Orion was a production company that I think they just sort of revived the company a couple years ago. They're like releasing new stuff under the Orion name.
Really?
But,
are they?
Yeah. Everything's getting rebooted now. Like Orion. But
I mean, an Orion logo is like an instant nostalgia hit for me.
Oh, it's so iconic.
A lot of those, a lot of movies like I grew up watching on tape, and that would come on TV and stuff.
You know you are in for a treat when you see that Orion logo. But let's talk about fucking RoboCop, because fucking RoboCop is probably the most pertinent movie when it comes to contrasting Verhoeven and Marvel shit, because again, there is a direct thorough line you can make from RoboCop to Iron Man. Iron Man was very explicitly inspired by RoboCop in a shit ton of aspects. You already heard us talk about that.
Yeah.
Listen to the first episode.
Yeah, Jon Favreau explicitly said so, which is funny because it's like, it's just so missing like the cynicism. And I mean, by necessity it would have to, but it's like, it's so absent the cynicism and the punch, and the grimy texture of RoboCop. I love this movie so much. Like it's hard not to just gush about it. It's a perfect movie.
Well, I have the new Arrow video Blu-ray release. I got it for Christmas this past year, so I got to enjoy that new transfer. I also listened to some of the Criterion collections commentary as well, which had some very interesting little tidbits in it. But yeah, RoboCop is, again, it's a perfect movie, but just on this rewatch, it really sunk in how much of a contrast this is to what we get now in our big spectacle genre movies. Like there is that biting cynicism that it's right there at the very beginning. Like the opening news story is about a nation's use and possession of weapons and nuclear deterrence. Like before Verhoeven
it's
does
specifically
anything.
it's because this movie came out before the end of apartheid in South Africa. It's a holdout military dictatorship in Pretoria that has maintained apartheid, has got nukes from the French to hold off what I assume is like the ANC kind of in a civil war, and then the other one is the Star Wars orbital peace platform.
Yes.
Being constructed, which later in the film, in another clip, misfires and kills two presidents because it hits a retirement community in California.
Like, before Verhoeven does anything else, he establishes that power in this very near futuristic world is weaponry, and weaponry is in the pockets of multinational corporations. So that... And he does very much the same thing in Starship Troopers, because you just watched it. I just watched it last night. It literally opens with that "I'm doing my part" propaganda ad, and out pops that tiny little Aryan child in full soldier garb. And the next shot is the mobile infantry's vaguely Nazi looking flag. Like, it's just, it shows you what kind of world we've been dropped into. Just before we meet any characters, before we even know what the movie is about, we see its media.
Yeah, it's and I love that the future of RoboCop is, there's a handful of things in it that are like a RoboCop that are outwardly futuristic, but most of it stylistically just it looks like 1987 but more.
But worse. It's now, worse. But worse. Yeah. Which is how you can define this current era. Like, imagine 2018, but worse. That's 2022. 2018, but worse.
I found Ed Neumeyer's Twitter, and he hasn't used it since 2014, but like one of his last posts was, the formula for prognostication is just... imagine the worst and make a joke about it.
Yeah, we shouldn't solely credit RoboCop to just Paul Verhoeven, because the script was co-written by Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner, and their contributions to the overall product are just, you wouldn't have this movie without either of them. I know in my copy of RoboCop, they did a new interview with Michael Miner, and he spoke a lot about having anti-corporate political roots. He used the phrase predatory capitalism a lot when he was discussing the original script for RoboCop, commenting that American crime is this enterprise that's fostered by American capitalism and corporations. So in the logic of this movie, America is a land of private property where everything must be owned, controlled, and given a serial number. And hence, we need the police because police protect our things. Not so much people, but our things. And was sort of the driving connection in, both Miner and Ed Neumeyer's minds about that relationship between corporate power, capitalism, and law enforcement.
Yeah, there's always that fear, because I think anyone who's kind of politically left likes to get too excited about seeing their politics reflected back at them in media that might not, like, projecting what you want to see in something you like. And I'm always wary of that, of reading something as more left-wing explicitly than it is. But listening to the commentaries, is like all the little things like you see in the movie, they're very like, oh yeah, no, it is absolutely, I mean, obviously it's like satirical, but it's like it really is like going that as far as you think it is, right down to when RoboCop's his first kind of introductory action scene after Alex Murphy is blown to bits and rebuilt as a cyborg. I assume we don't need to worry about spoilers. It's RoboCop.
No, if you haven't seen RoboCop in your
movie.
If you haven't seen RoboCop and you're listening to this right now, and you have listened to our previous episodes before, just stop listening and go watch RoboCop.
If
do you need me to show up at your doorstep and tell you, watch Robocop, you fucking Gerber baby-brained imbecile.
Speaking of, we'll get to there's a fun bit from the commentary track I listened to from that was originally the DVD release about the Gerber baby food.
Oh. Oh yeah, that's because he eats the Gerber baby food. That's right. I forgot.
Yeah, but when he's shooting the Gerber baby jars as target practice to recalibrate his system, there's a fun bit Verhoeven had to say about that. But the introductory action sequence for RoboCop is a hostage situation at City Hall. A town councilman's lost his job and he's lost his mind. He's holding everyone hostage. He's demanding his job back and like a bunch of money and a big fast car with shitty gas mileage.
Yeah, which is just again so on the nose in terms
just
of
chef's
what
kiss.
This, yeah.
But I had a feeling watching, and I never thought of this before because I've seen this movie a bunch. I love this movie, but watching it this time, I had like a flash of like, is this inspired by the Milk Marconi killings when that city councilman killed Harvey Milk and the mayor of San Francisco in the 70s? And it was. Neumeier said it in the commentary that he grew up in San Francisco and was more of that, which, like, I wonder, and I mean, like, I have no evidence for this, it's pure speculation, but that wouldn't totally shock me if that was, like, because it was the 70s and they're just killing a lot of progressive politicians and movement leaders, if maybe that was, like, a domestic Gladio thing. I don't know. I'm not saying I know it is, or that I have even any reason to believe it is, but that's just another thing that popped in my head.
But I guess obviously there's a lot of surface level comparisons you can make between RoboCop and Iron Man, just guy in robot suit. But there are a couple of direct connections that we've discovered. One being that the great Miguel Ferrer, who plays Bob, the slimy, horrible OCP exec who gets murked by Dick Jones. But
less slimy and horrible than Dick Jones.
Slightly less. I mean, the great Miguel Ferrer, who, rest in peace, was also on Twin Peaks. So we got our first of presumably many future David Lynch connections. But Miguel Ferrer apparently wrote for Marvel for a few years, which I had no idea.
That is a weird one. I'm still and that he's like related to George Clooney.
Yeah, that he's a Clooney was also that's like when you discover that Nick Cage is actually a Coppola. You know, that puts you, that makes you sit and think for a minute.
But he's also like, if you look at his career, like he was also like all over a lot of like earlier attempts at comic book adaptations that either didn't get off the ground or were like TV shows or animation. He played a supervillain called the Weatherman in a failed 1997 TV pilot for Justice League of America. And then he voiced an equivalent character in Superman the Animated Series. He voiced Aquaman in another episode of that series. And I mean, like it's just, you see like, it's just that thing where you start to see like the cobweb of interrelations as comic books percolated through mainstream culture, then up to where they are now. Is sort of interesting.
And another thing, this was something I learned through the Criterion commentary, is that the scene in the robbery store convenience scene, when the robber goes and picks up a comic book, he actually picks up an Iron Man comic book. Which you don't really see it, but it's they confirmed, I think it was either Ed Neumeier or Michael Miner said explicitly, he picked up an Iron Man comic book as like a sort of tip of the hat. Yeah, because there is definitely a similarity there. Like RoboCop is, and there's obviously a bit of Judge Dredd in RoboCop. Right, of course, they mentioned that the jaw visible. They mentioned that in the design for the suit, but I believe so. Before they actually wrote the original first draft of what would be RoboCop, Michael Miner had a concept that he called Super Cop, and it was basically about an actual robotic suit that a regular cop would put on. So it wasn't actually a cyborg, which seems much more in the literal vein of like Tony Stark and Iron Man. So RoboCop in a alternate weird sort of world, it would have been Super Cop, and it basically would have been an R-rated Iron Man. But Tony Stark is a cop and not a skeevy, narcissistic billionaire with charm.
Yeah, Iron Man just kind of like combines Bob and Alex Murphy into one guy.
Well, I realized...
And the scientist.
I realized that, well, the critical thread of RoboCop is that the hero is owned and augmented by a corporation. So he's a person that's turned into a weapon that a multinational corporation can wield as it sees fit. And so Murphy's character arc as RoboCop is completely contingent upon him reclaiming his humanity from OCP. Tony Stark, and thus Iron Man, is the corporation. There is no quest of him having to retain, like, his humanity. And even if it's a question of, like, oh, Tony Stark, he has to learn how not to be such a shitty guy. Like, well, Tony Stark has a heart, but we never see Tony Stark do anything that bad. He's not doing rails of coke with bitches like Bob does.
That's the thing. He can't, and he's absolutely like that guy. Like
he is that guy, but we don't see him do that. If you made a harder edged version
of that movie, but like I find it interesting too. Like Tony Stark becomes his redemption comes through him becoming more of a machine and more of a product.
Yeah.
Not less. I also noticed, like, Iron Man also dabbles in the Christ allegory. Like Iron Man does die and come back.
Vague. He comes out of a cave.
Yeah. I know, he comes out of a cave too. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But like, cause he does kind of like near-death experiences in movies are often like treated as like a death and resurrection. And RoboCop is like, in the commentary, Verhoeven makes us really explicit. Like, he saw RoboCop as the American Jesus, where he comes to life. He dies horribly. Apparently he could use the Christ allegory to go to Orion and like justify the excessive violence of Murphy's execution. Is like, it's part of the Passion narrative. And he dies. He comes back. He walks on, and at the end of the movie, he walks on water. And instead of arresting Clarence Boddicker, executes him. And he's like, this is the American Christ. He walks on water and kills people instead of dying for them. And I feel like I mangled that a little bit.
No,
in the description of it. But that was perfect. I remember thinking, like, the one thing I never quite understood was, why is RoboCop Christ other than just Verhoeven's general preoccupation with Christ metaphors? And then when he said that, it like I felt like I should have understood that the whole time.
Yeah, well, Verhoeven also, he, as you said earlier on, his side gig is that he is a very well-respected and very well-researched Christ scholar. Again, his latest movie is about a horny lesbian nun. Mwah, perfect. Like, not both the best, the new, like, Ken Russell in terms of perfectly putting Catholic indulgence and savagery on screen, but he really, I think that Christ sort of allegory he found in there was what really got him invested in RoboCop, because I guess initially Orion had sent him the screenplay. He looked it over and he was like, this is silly and stupid, and he like threw it in the trash, and then his wife picked it out, and like any good wife does, she was like, no, read this again. You're clearly missing something. This is fucking brilliant.
Yeah,
you
so
read it again.
We should give a lot of credit to Martine tours, if I'm probably making this, but like it's more French pronounced or something, for actually being the one who took a look at the script and saw that there was more there than just the goofy title Robocop, and it convinced Verhoeven to make the movie.
I mean, and we can't also talk about Robocop without talking about its depiction of the military and as an extension of just corporations in the military in the world of Robocop are one and the same thing. Like, they outright say, we practically are the military.
That's what Dick Jones says when Boddicker asks him, like, do you have military hardware? And he says, we practically are the military. And there's another note I have from the commentary where Verhoeven says, oh, right, they're talking about the like GPS prop that they have and how goofy it looks now. And they're talking about it around the same time he says that line, and Verhoeven says something like, well, it makes sense. I mean, OCP is the military, and then look at all the missiles they fired into Iraq. Like 40% of them didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, that's also the joke of Ed 209. Like, like Dick Jones is like the actual hardcore version of a Justin Hammer. His tech doesn't work.
Yeah, well, he says, we've got a guaranteed military contract for this, 20 years of maintenance and parts. Who cares if it works? It's literally the F-35. It's the exact same thing.
The military is all a weapons contracting grift. That's what it is. And again, this movie is very prescient in how it shows that the future of law enforcement is militarization. It's got its finger on the pulse. Granted, this is also very much a movie that was satirizing Reagan's America, and as we're all perfectly aware, Reagan's America fucking sucked. Was a hell world in its own right.
Well, Reagan's America never ended.
Yeah, that is true.
That's why the movie feels so prescient, is it's just, we have continued, and I mean, Canada just goes where America goes. Like we've just continued along that trajectory of neoliberalism and austerity and an increase, and a state whose capacity to do anything withers away except for its capacity for repression. And ludicrous arms contracts.
But like, again, we would absolutely is Raytheon any different than OCP? Is Raytheon any different than Stark Industries? No. The answer is no.
The only difference is that OCP also makes the house you live in and owns the cops and funds the criminals. And I mean, it's kind of amalgamated capitalism, and we're heading that direction. Like, it's, at some point, like, Disney and Apple and Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are all going to merge together. It's already, I mean, you see it with like, Japan. Like, you go and buy like a Mitsubishi automobile or a Yamaha electric organ, or these companies that make like 80 billion different products from like appliances and stuff. And they also built warships and planes for the Imperial Japanese Navy back in the day. And they're broken up, but they've all, like the Liquid Terminator, they've all reamalgamated again.
Can we also talk about my favorite line in a movie ever, even though it doesn't have any bearing on or relation to anything that would happen in Marvel?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
So I just need to spotlight the fact that this rewatch really solidified that "bitches leave" is my favorite line of dialogue in any movie ever. Like, the story, I shared it on my Twitter feed, but there's through some featurette, they interviewed Kurtwood Smith and Miguel Ferrer about sort of the filming of that scene, and they were of the opinion that Paul, not being an American, being European, didn't understand that bitches has a more derogatory connotation to it in the United States, which is as a bitch herself. I think it very much depends on the context. Like, or if I have an established rapport with someone, like if you're a friend of mine, you call me like, oh, hey, bitch, totally fine. If you're some guy across the street and you just yell bitch at me, that's going to make me mad. But Paul Verhoeven just thought, you know, bitches probably meant like
Broads.
like broads or prostitutes or whatever. so Boddicker just comes, you know, gun in hand like death, knocking on the door, opens the door, puts the gun right in Bob's face, and bitches leave. And the bitches leave.
They said in the commentary, Kurtwood Smith improvised a lot of Boddicker stuff, like lines and like the body language and some of the like weird little things he does to intimidate people. I wonder if he improvised that one, because they said he improvised another really great line when he's trying to intimidate the drug manufacturer and all the guys pull guns on each other and he throws his hands up and says, guns, guns, guns.
Yeah, he's got such a menace to him too that like we're only 3 Marvel movies in, but none of the Marvel villains we've met so far really have any lasting power. You remember Boddicker. If not for bitches leave, for just how ruthless he kills Murphy during that scene. Like, he just tears him the fuck apart.
Kurtwood Smith rules. He was also always like the best part of that 70s show.
Yeah,
as the dad.
He has such menace, and I wouldn't be surprised if they casted him as the dad just because he was so menacing as Boddicker. I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, he rules. And apparently he's a case like one of those like plays like he's really good at playing a hard ass or a scary guy and then is just a total sweetheart in real life.
Oh,
guys.
Is he?
Yeah, actually when he goes to OCP to see Dick, and I love the corporate guys, so they all just have names like Bob and Dick. And he stops to like flirt very sleazily with the receptionist.
Yeah.
That is his real life wife. They married a year after Robocop came out, and they're still married to this day.
That's sweet. Also, another thing, OCP is very corporate. We never see any sort of corporate aspects to Stark Industries. All we just see is Tony Stark building machines and having fun and being cool. We don't see corporate snobs in a boardroom doing a dick measuring contest. We don't see white-laced yuppies doing rails of coke off of strippers' cleavage. We don't see some exec spinning in an intern's face because he got his coffee order wrong. So he's just the depiction of corporate power is so much more honest in its over-the-topness in Robocop than it ever will be in a Marvel movie.
Oh, it totally is. I think even like in the commentary, Newmeyer said he worked at the MCA, I want to say agency, but it's like an agency of agents, like representatives for actors and stuff, for about a year as an executive. And like a lot of the specific corporate stuff just came from his experience, like working at an actual Hollywood corporation and dealing with executives and those types of guys. But they do like there's just that kind of like, because there's that big scene where Bob and Dick have this kind of like showdown in the bathroom. You see
and he doesn't watch his hands. He runs his unwashed dick piss hand through Bob Woodward's hair, and it's very menacing when you realize he didn't wash his hands.
I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking about how Bob is like, when he realizes he's trash talking Dick and realizes he's like in the stall, and he pisses his pants when he's realizes that he's there and is like trying to zip up in a hurry, and everybody runs out of the bathroom.
That's a great scene.
It's an underrated part of the movie, just the comedy drama of these just these totally egotistical guys who are all clambering over each other to get to the top.
Well, again, the movie understands that we're not supposed to root for these guys. They're not cool. They're slimy. They lie through their teeth. They're backstabbing, and they literally piss their pants and don't wash their hands after going to the bathroom. Like, when the whole concept of Tony Stark, or the whole mission, is he needs to be cool. He's a cool guy. Like, he has swag.
And that's the modern studio system now, is so homogenized and risk averse and stuff. It's like, I don't even think it's like, oh, we have to defend corporate ideology. It's just, well, like, our characters really just need to love the hero so much, and he can't he can't be that flawed. You can't have that like whatever, I don't know, satirical element was imagined might be in the movie. It's like the one line where he talks about, where he's introducing that missile in Iron Man, he's introducing that missile system at the beginning, and is like, that's the way Dad did it. It's the way America does it. That's like it. That's like the only real hint of that you get in that whole movie. Because you couldn't do anything that would make people upset.
Because we have to follow this guy through 8 more films, and he has to be our main character, basically. So we can't have any reason to dislike him, which is a shame, because I think you can make very compelling and interesting characters who are also horrible assholes and terrible people.
And I mean, like, Robert Downey Jr. has like that charisma. You could, I think, make his character much worse and not lose an audience.
Like,
if you had like any artistic integrity.
Like, I could perfectly envision like Tony Stark being in like a Tony Stark like character appearing in like a Verhoeven movie. Like, but he has to be a lot meaner, and he has to be a slimy bad guy like Kyle MacLachlan's character in Showgirls. He has to be more like that. He can't have that charming, like, oh, well, he actually does have a heart. No, it has to be all black inside and all nothing but bad feelings, bad times, just a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, you could totally make that movie, because I mean, like, people loved I mean, admittedly, like, RoboCop is also doing the thing where it's for the sake of the studio and making money. It's also got to work as just on its like face level action movie, which is also an essential part to the satire too, is that works at that level. And like you could make that movie now and still, like, just like the most inattentive media literate parts of your audience just go, cool action movie, and move on. But I mean, that's the thing, like, as much as I'm frustrated by everything never dying, eternally recurring, like, I think you can make perfectly, like, in principle, in a parallel universe, you can make a perfectly good comic book movie. They don't have to be like this.
No, there's actually no rules.
You could make that interesting, satirical, dark-edged Iron Man movie, and I think it would be totally workable if somebody who owned the rights was willing to spend the money. But Disney is outrageously conservative, like lowercase c.
When it comes to their intellectual properties, they will fight you tooth and nail over use of it. So you're not going to be seeing any hard R Iron Man fan films, I guess. Well, anytime soon. We're not going to get any good shit, is what I'm saying.
They'd never spend the money on something like that. Like, they would never fund it if someone came to them like, I've got this really interesting take. I mean, again, I don't know if like Orion or MGM or anybody ever knew what these movies, like, I don't know if anybody Orion understood that RoboCop was satirical or Total Recall or Starship Troopers. I always suspected that those guys, like the money men, kind of were having the wool pulled over their eyes a little bit.
Well, I know people really liked RoboCop when it came out. Like, even I think it was Ed Neumeyer, or either Ed Neumeyer or Michael Miner, mentioning that they played the movie in front of like some police officers.
Yeah,
or a
yeah,
police
that was
union. He was
in the
terrified
commentary.
they were going to hate it, and they fucking loved it. So that was, but meanwhile, fast forward to, and I guess this can be our segue into talking about Starship Troopers. Fast forward to Starship Troopers, it's 1997, and a lot of critics just outright dismissed this movie and called it just fascist propaganda. And it's like, no, no, no. This is what a fascist society that would make fascist propaganda. That's what this movie would be. That's the movie.
Before we move on, I just had a couple more notes here. Things. One, just a little other fun thing from the commentary.
Okay.
Aside from one who's named after a director Neumeyer worked with, all of the cops have the last names of serial killers.
Oh, yeah, that's so good.
And they made... and I think this is one of those things where it kind of shows how, like, there was definitely a chunk of the audience that did not understand, and production and license holders did not really understand the nature of the movie. There was in 1988 a RoboCop kids cartoon.
Yeah, that RoboCop has a surprising amount of media attached to it. Like, of course, it spawned 2 other sequels. Haven't seen RoboCop 2. Have no interest in seeing RoboCop 3.
No. There was also in the 90s or early 2000s like a cheap sci-fi series, only did like 8 episodes or something, called RoboCop Prime Directive.
Okay.
Which is very goofy. There's also a bunch of comic books. Like, a lot of these movies that are popular with nerds got comic books, and it
got Marvel Comics.
And they all did, like, this is like, because it was the model pioneered in comics, was they started doing the crossover. So it's like, if you read like comics from like the 80s and 90s, like RoboCop and Terminator and Predator and the Aliens and Batman and Wolverine have all fought each other in various iterations. And I feel like as we're in the franchise revival loop forever, and companies are either consolidating so much IP or desperate enough for money that they're willing to make deals, that we will start getting those movies. Like, if they can make these metaverse, multi-universe movies, like the new Spider-Man and the Space Jam and stuff, and Ready Player One, it seems like almost inevitable we're going to get that, like, those goofy 90s comic stories of RoboCop and Terminator fighting the Predator, right? Like, that's so much brand recognition. Someone's going to do it. They'll probably make it cheap and it'll go straight to streaming, but it'll happen.
Oh, it's going to go. It's not even like, you can watch that on the dark side of YouTube. That's generated by some like click farm in Singapore or whatever. Like, you know what I'm talking about? It's like, the
Spider-Man Elsa, Spider-Man
pregnant Elsa.
Yeah, that is the future of entertainment. Is people just looking at, like, what keywords, for whatever esoteric reasons, what keywords stoke the algorithm, slap them all together,
make it cheap.
And yeah, I just think we'll start seeing that stuff officially made by the IP holders. I mean, Alien versus Predator already happened 15 years ago. Freddy versus Jason. Like, it's just I see that stuff getting more outrageous and left field and cumbersome as it goes on. And I, for one, am sort of looking forward to it. Like that's the death of cinema.
Yeah, no, it's we have front row seats to the death of cinema, and I think on one hand that's something I kind of want to see, just in the sense everyone wants to pull down or slow down when they're passing by a terrible car accident and check out what's going on. Like, I have that morbid fascination with shit like Space Jam 2.
Yeah,
or just
exactly.
That more, like, in the sense, like, before well, I should say I had that morbid fascination before I watched, because then after I watched it, I was like, I've made a terrible mistake. But it's like, we're not going to get these sort of movies anymore. And that's, we think about really great filmmakers that no longer make movies, or, at least American movies. I think of, like, of course, Paul Verhoeven. He's still making movies, but not in America. But people like John Carpenter, or like John Waters, like people whose movies have had such like an impact, I think, on both of our viewing habits, and they just don't make movies anymore.
Oh, John Carpenter's huge for me.
Their like presence is just so missed in the whole media landscape right now.
Oh yeah, like I said, like anybody like that with any sort of artistic integrity or vision, they're not gonna get through the development process. You might be able to go to like A24 and make like a relatively lower budget, like indie horror film or something. But anything,
yeah, it has to be indie art house now. That's it.
I mean, Robocop was like a mid-budget movie. Like its budget adjusted for inflation now would be like $30 million. You could make 10 Robocops for an Avengers movie. But they just don't make those movies anymore, because I think because everything's consolidated, it's like more and more eggs got to go into one basket. You've got this kind of a massive profit that needs to be consolidated to keep its expanding at a given rate. And so there's not, there's not an interest for that kind of sweet spot mid-budget where you could make something big and visually impressive, but that didn't need the entire world to like it to turn a profit.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, moving on to
so
Starship Troopers. Oh,
speaking of movies that would never be made today, Starship Troopers, which, again, upon rewatch, I'm like, we're never going to see a movie like this ever again.
Oh, never. No, they'd never let you make this.
If this movie had come out now, imagine the think pieces that would have come out. All the horrible blue check mark opinions.
I mean,
just how, as bad as its reception was in like 1997, it would not have fared any better in 2021 or 2022.
No, people. I mean, just the mid-brow critics are just idiots. Like, how I can understand like your average audience member not getting it, maybe because you're even if you're not like a stupid person, you expect Hollywood movies to be taken at face value because they're Hollywood movies. You don't extend them the credit. Anybody who's supposed to be media illiterate enough to be a critic, I don't know how they couldn't get it. Like, I don't know how you could completely miss, like how you could watch those. Would you like to know more sequences and not understand what the movie's doing?
And it's those are the first things that show up in the movie too. Again, like the first thing you see is this little Aryan child in army fatigues going, "I'm doing my part," and everyone turns and smiles at him. Cut immediately to Nazi flag. Like, it's signaling to you so fucking hard that this is a satire, and that this is a satire of what a future totalitarian fascist society that is run on the blood of the military, where being a member of the military guarantees you citizenship. Like Robert Ebert called this a kiddie movie.
Yeah, it's hard to get a breeding license if you're not a citizen. I remember that line stood out. I'm even looking at like Rotten Tomatoes right now, and I mean, look at these quotes: lacking the sophistication of the average comic book.
What?
That's Liam Lacey of the Globe and Mail, a Red Star top critic.
Fuck you, Lacey.
Kenneth Turan, Los Angeles Times. A jaw-dropping experience so rigorously one-dimensional and free from even the pretense of intelligence.
That's the point. They're supposed to be dead behind the eyes.
Exactly. Scott Rosenberg Salon lacks the courage of the book's fascist conclusions. It's and some of these are the marked fresh reviews. Like, it's astonishing how stupid these people are.
Yeah, like, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people who are film critics, or at least I shouldn't even say film critics, or just people who are in the position to have their opinions on movies published on a massive platform with a regularity, and people who make basically a career out of being a film critic. A lot of them are really dumb. I've learned they're just so dumb.
No, total bird brains. It's
like no sense for joy or sense of like they have to have this sort of intellectual distance from it, and it's not enough to have fun, and sometimes it's also just like they have to have things spoon-fed to them. And if it doesn't do that, it's a complete failure on every moral and identity-based basis.
Yeah, it's everything is read so like they're read really superficially, or they're just like combined, but with like reaching like projection. It's weird. I want to say I found one more quote here from someone who really liked the movie, April 6, 2009, a certified Rotten Tomatoes critic. Starship Troopers is a war satire that outshines even Kubrick's great film Dr. Strangelove. Do you know who that critic is?
Well, it certainly wasn't Robert Ebert, because he gave that.
It's someone
Ebert,
who's maybe most famous for who their half sister is.
Oh no! Oh no! It's Cole Smithy.
Yes, it's Cole
gentlemen.
Smithy. Chris Chan's brother.
Oh. I mean, he calls himself the world's smartest film critic, right? Or something like that.
He was the guy who was like had like a contest where if you gave him a bunch of money, you could have dinner with him and just listen to his awesome movie opinions. But you know what? At least he understood Starship Troopers, which is more than I can say for, you know, a lot of these people who were right at like the prestigious papers.
Now I'm thinking about what Chris Chan's reaction to Starship Troopers would be. First of all, I don't think Chris would watch Starship Troopers. Never mind, understand it, or just Chris would have consumed it very superficially.
Oh, totally. Like Chris consumes everything completely superficially. Chris is really kind of a weird refraction of like I think just like I think Chris Chan is so weird because they're the most normal baseline American. Like if you really made someone like of that generation, of their age category and demographic, if you made that person, they would actually be fantastically weird.
The ultimate consumer.
The ultimate consumer takes everything at face value, totally solipsistic, God in their own mind, but also persecuted by everyone. Like, I mean, Chris Chan's really kind of the perfect American.
Yeah.
Profoundly lazy.
I like that we keep using the word superficial too, because that is a very defining aesthetic in this movie.
It is.
I think it was Jay Bauman, because again, I've already mentioned I'm a big Red Letter Media fan. They've done a review on Starship Troopers, and he said something about how the casting of this movie was very much determined by needing people who just look very dead behind the eyes and completely like a Sears catalog. And you get that complete with like Denise Richards and who plays Casper Van Dien, who I don't think has been in anything else of note, but he has that perfect jock look to him that they have this Aryan sort of looking ideal body and
and
beauty sort of
they're
ratio
all
of like this.
Argentines.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note they're all in the movie. They all live in Buenos Aires, and they're all super white, ubermensch Argentines who look like they should be named like John Smith, but are all named like Carbon Ibanez. And like, who are the white Aryan looking South Americans?
Well, we know who they're probably related to.
Yeah, which I think just makes it such a good.
And for those who aren't aware, Starship Troopers is actually based on a book that was written by a guy who was pretty into fascism.
Robert. Well, Robert, I don't know if I'd call him. I'd say like Starship Troopers is very fascistic in particular as a book, but Heinlein was right wing definitely broadly, but like Frank Herbert, he was especially in the 60s became like a weird alt countercultural, right? Like there's that strong libertarian streak running through it. Like
I'm reading Dune right now.
Robert Heinlein was a weird. I read some of his later stuff. I read a lot of Heinlein as a kid.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay.
Starship Troopers is, from what I remember, actually like kind of dull. The book is different in a lot of ways. Like it's an early example of like guys in mech suits in the book, where it's like, and it's that very like, speaking of fascism, like that very like Ostfront, like each one of our guys are superior morale and technology. We're worth 10,000 the others. Where it's like each guy's in a mech suit and is just like a solo mobile like infantry division on their own.
Yeah.
And although the nuclear rocket launchers were totally a thing in the book.
Like the bug ones?
No, like the rocket, like they've got big in the rocket launchers they use that they shoot down the bug holes or into the big beetles that are just nuclear bombs that you fire as infantry. They were in the book. And also they were a thing in real life, the Davy Crockett nuclear small nuclear rocket, which they never used, but it's the Cold War. They just did insane stuff.
Something,
but it's pretty dull. But Heinlein's later stuff can be kind of interesting because it gets very weird. Like he in the late 60s, he wrote a book called Fear No Evil, where a rich guy in the future dies and his brain is transplanted into he's set up so his brain will be transplanted into a new body. And it turns out to be the body of his young, hot secretary, who's a woman.
Oh my God.
And even though it's not supposed to happen because it's just swapping brains out, he like starts hearing her voice in his head, and it's kind of ambiguous if it's like a psychological thing or not.
Okay.
And he like starts experiencing life as a woman, has sex with a man.
Ooh, this sounds interesting.
Even though he was straight in his previous life. It's wild. It's very, very weird. I don't know if it's a good book now because I read it so long ago, but it's interesting for being so out there in terms of a premise and where it goes. But
yeah,
I digress. Sorry.
Well, you know what's also out there? The use of Mazzy Star's fade into you during the fist fight scene.
Oh yeah, that was
I didn't realize until this watch through.
I didn't know the name of the song, but I remember thinking like, this is such a.
It's so weird to be in this. Like that's a song you dance to at your high school dance with like your sweetheart, or if you're going through like a hard time and you need to show it in little montage, not during a brutal fist fight over Denise Richards.
Which, like, would you get in a fist fight over Denise Richards?
Yeah. She's very pretty. She's very pretty.
Yeah.
She's, I mean, you understand why she was casted for this part and why Johnny Rico is so fucking in love with her, even though there is nothing there. She is a vacant hole. They're all vacant voids of personality. They are dead behind the eyes. There is nothing there.
Yeah, they're all pretty people from those cheesy WB and such teen dramas.
Well,
right?
and then they're all, again, the whole thing they really hammer into throughout this movie is that there is always going to be someone coming up to replace you. You are completely expendable. You are just a body. You are just fodder for the military emperor. You're just a body in a space. You know, if you are horribly maimed or outlive your purpose, you're going to be replaced. Like there is.
Oh yeah, like it's just everybody dies and immediately they're replaced with a bunch of new guys, and they just and it's like they're into it. It's like, yeah, we go and we die and we're prepared to die, and that's kind of.
Do you want to live
awesome.
forever?
Yeah. And I love oh yeah, you know, I need to look it up because I always get Michael Ironside, right?
Michael. Yes.
I think sometimes I confuse him with Jeremy Irons just because they both have iron in the name.
Yes.
Or I confuse which name.
Which is, fun fact, I guess they initially looked at Michael Ironside to play Alex Murphy in Robocop. So before they casted Peter Weller, because they based casting off of Robocop off of the best body type to fit in the suit. Like a very specific body type was needed to walk around
a lean, muscular,
a lean, long, muscular guy, and Michael Ironside just didn't have the body for it. Hence, they contacted Peter Weller. But I mean, Michael Ironside has like no fucking hand, and the first actual sort of scene we get is him giving a monologue and speech to this classroom of WB teens about how violence is always the answer. And Denise Richards says the most chilling fucking thing. He asks, you know, what would the people of Hiroshima or Nagasaki would have said? And Denise Richards, with that perfect crest white smile, says, nothing. They were destroyed by a nuclear bomb. And it's so fucking cold.
It's like so creepy.
It's so creepy. Like, again, how anyone misread this movie, like, it's not actually subtle.
No, it's very explicit.
Will say, oh, it doesn't really signal itself as being fascist until Neil Patrick Harris walks out in the, like, SS uniform. But it's, again, it's literally there in the very first scene.
Yeah, Michael Ironside is strutting around explaining how, like, and then we got rid of weak, degenerate democracy and replaced it with the military dictatorship that has kept society orderly and peaceful to this day for generations. Like, it's right there.
It's
I also find it's something interesting, and I saw an interview where Neumeier talked about how this was very explicit, is it's a racially integrated and gender egalitarian fascist military dictatorship.
Yeah.
Like it's
towards the end of the movie, the whole thing is being led by a black lady.
Yeah, exactly. The one Sky Marshal is
Sky Marshal Kamala Harris.
Yeah. I remember thinking that, like, that would be totally like, yes, Queen, we get POC woman Mussolini.
Bug killer, the notorious bug killer.
Yeah, it's. And I think that's such a great choice, because that's kind of where I see, you know, if America went from like 80% fascist to 110% fascist, I think it would be that. It wouldn't be retrograde, explicitly white supremacist, goose stepping, swastikas, all that stuff that is blatantly bad guy. Like, I think it would be like this kind of culturally, superficially liberal kind of fascism. Like, it's like,
a parasitic relationship between neoliberalism and militant fascism through there, like, taken to its logical extreme. So you get like that woke shit, you know, with a black lady leading the space Nazi troops and gender neutral showers, which I think is a callback to the wasn't a shower scene, but the locker room scene in Robocop. Yeah, which also is gender neutral, but Paul Verhoeven was like, nobody noticed, so I did it again in Starship.
And I find it like not only is it such a good prescient choice, but like, did you see there's a little while ago there was like one of those like Israeli Defense Forces like recruitment ads.
Oh yeah,
where it's like, we've got gays and we've got women and
we've got a Muslim, we've got a black lady.
I remember watching that, and that was like that felt like right out of this movie.
We have the ships. We have the weapons. We need soldiers. Like, it's literally, you could play the little recruitment adverts in this movie, and they're basically the same as what the IDF puts out as propaganda.
And I mean,
it's the same.
Like, not even exaggerating a little. It's uncanny.
I'm not trying to be edgy or trying to be incendiary.
I'm being very matter of fact.
I'm just saying a fact.
Israel is even more than America. It's just Starship Troopers, the country.
I mean, this is
if you look at man on the street interviews and stuff, like a lot of people in Israel really do look at the Palestinians as not different from bugs. It's fucking appalling. Not to be as a Canadian on my high horse, my country's like fucked up and racist too. But
you guys are hiding like really a mass genocide of.
Oh, I'm probably sitting on a pile of
dead
children
indigenous
right
children.
Now. Yeah. Our countries are built on a foundation of blood and bone.
Literally.
Yeah.
Sort of jumping off of that, another thing I was thinking of, again, connecting this back to the tissue of the Marvel conversation, is this sort of dichotomy this movie presents between like heroes and regular civilians. Like, being a hero is, in the context of the world of Starship Troopers, it's dying for the planet. But of course, the catch is these people aren't actually heroes. We're the bad guys. Like Johnny Rico, he's asked to surmise what the difference between a citizen and a regular civilian is. He says, and I wrote this down, a civilian accepts personal responsibility for the safety of the politic, defending it with his life. A civilian does not.
I think that's from the book too.
Okay.
Verbatim.
So like, and it's shown that citizenship basically grants you certain indelible rights that we would, or rights we would consider like essential human rights in the United States or Canada.
Yeah, you can vote. It's you
can have children or freeze your eggs or something.
It seems to be implied, like, 'cause there's one guy that's there, so he can go to Harvard, and Johnny Rico's family, who aren't citizens, are sending him to Harvard, but they're obviously like affluent.
Yeah.
So it's kind of implied that there's like a class disparity where if you're upper class, money can get you things that you'd otherwise need citizenship for, like a good education, the ability to reproduce. Whereas if you're poor, you need citizenship to get those privileges. So it's like the poorer you are, the more you're funneled into military, which is true in the States, where it's like, if you get something approaching socialized medicine and a pathway to education, the military is one of your few routes to that. It's like the military or sports for a lot of people, which is almost certainly by design.
Yeah. Also, I realized I think I might be really, because I know I've been touting up like, oh, well, when we get to watch Captain America, it'll be different. I think I fucked myself over, because now I think all I'm going to think about when I watch that movie is Starship Troopers and just how it depicts the military sort of culture.
It'll be
this death machine.
Well, like Verhoeven, for the visuals of the film, like the framing, the style, very much drew from Nazi World War II propaganda movies.
Oh, there's like that. There's this one long shot. It's when Johnny Rico is going to the airport. He's leaving. And he meets up with Carmen, and it's this whole long like crane shot. It has this. It's all one unbroken shot. And I haven't seen any Leni Riefenstahl, whatever. I don't fucking care. I don't want to sit down and watch a Nazi movie. Like, that's not
a real girl boss and
a real girl boss. But I, as a film person, I've read enough about sort of why her movies are important in terms of looking at sort of like the technical side of filmmaking and sort of what it like the same way we talk about something like Birth of the Nation. Like, we can't have a conversation about movies without talking about, or just the beginning of cinema as a artistic medium without talking about fucking Birth of the Nation. You can't talk about cinema in certain aspects without talking about like Leni Riefenstahl or especially like documentary and filmmaking. But yeah, there are a lot of very, very Riefenstahl-esque shots throughout this. Like that scene, I'm thinking about the scene where Johnny Rico gets whipped and how that's framed, like the, you know, all the soldiers are lined up and how it's like the use of very, very flat lighting as well, but it's also the sets themselves have this angular like brutalism to them. It also kind of, I haven't seen Total Recall in a while, but it did kind of resemble the look of Total Recall a little bit.
Total Recall also I saw that, but Total Recall has, like, when you get to Mars, it's more grimy and industrial because it's, you know, but like, yeah, everything is very, very clean and sterile and bright in Starship Troopers. Like, it has, that's the thing, is like all these Marvel movies kind of look like this now, like bright and sterile and almost TV-ish, and blatantly kind of artificial. But here it's a deliberate choice.
Yeah,
to achieve a specific effect. Every like the props. Like, I want to talk a little bit about the guns they use.
Sure, go off, Queen.
Because they are, and I mean, movie guns are often ridiculous, but these are like very deliberately, like, as guns, they don't make any sense. They're way too big, and there's no way to aim them. They have no sights on them,
and also,
except the ones with the big, ridiculous sniper scopes, which look like the Nazis had a very early version of thermal scopes that saw very limited use, and they look just like that.
Well, here's another thing, and I realized upon rewatch, the weapons are terrible. Like, our weapons are terrible. Like,
and they don't work very good.
Why do we think we're going to win sending a bunch of scrawny-ass soldiers out with little BB guns when there are these giant-ass bugs walking around? It wasn't until they started carpet bombing the goddamn things that I was like, well, why weren't we doing that in the first place?
It takes a whole squad of guys to, like, kill one bug unless you, like, really nail it. And in the book, it's the opposite. It's like the one guy in his infantry suit's super powerful, but the bugs just overwhelm him with numbers. And in this, it's like, the humans are outnumbered and woefully ineffective. Like, just they underestimate the alien bugs at like every turn. Because they're just stupid bugs. They go to do their big D-Day assault, and the aliens have these beetles that fire like plasma artillery out of their butts, and they're like, it's just random. They just kind of do that, and it's like, no, they're fighting back. They're intelligent and they know what they're doing. But that's the fascist thing, where your enemy is, if you go back at least to like Umberto Eco's famous essay, it's like the enemy is simultaneously everywhere and all powerful, but also weak and stupid and pathetic and totally inferior to you. But I do think it's interesting how, like, so many blockbusters now have that, like I said, bright, flatly lit, blatantly artificial, almost TV look. As this movie does, but just by default.
It's not an intentional stylistic choice. It's just like, this is what everything looks like now.
Just cheap, fast, industrial movie production.
Do we want to talk about Hollow Man? Because I kind of want to talk about Hollow Man, because I just wanted to
say one more thing where you mentioned just like how like they fight really stupidly, and that's I also feels like a very, very deliberate choice. As someone who's a dabbler in military history, it's like it is hysterical how they just run in. They just amass the guys with guns. just charging in like disorganized medieval infantry to get destroyed.
Yeah, it's like no fucking wonder we're losing. We're just sending a bunch of children out with Nerf guns to kill these giant bugs, and yeah, our military strategy just seems terrible, which is, again, we have shitty weapons. We're just throwing bodies at these bugs. Like, again, the emphasis on the fact that the military is just a death machine that is powered by bodies.
It's an organ grinder. People just get fed in.
It's a meat grinder. It's a organ grinder. And that's also like fascism is fueled by the death drive. Like this is a empire built and fueled by death.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing I wanted to note. This movie came out in 1997, but the way it's structured with like, there's a big, seemingly like unprovoked attack where it never really says clearly, unless you believe like the propaganda clip that says that the aliens even did it, that wipes out Buenos Aires. And if they did, it's like they are provoked by settlement in their sort of territory by Mormons, space Mormons.
Space Mormons.
Which is also a thing in the show The Expanse, which is kind of fun.
Okay.
But actually, I've seen that a lot because that makes sense because Mormons are like the always chasing the frontier sort of religion. But
yeah, we're not fans of Mormons on this podcast, I don't think.
Mitt
Romney, if you're listening, fuck off.
But I found it interesting how much this movie mirrors like 9/11 and then the Iraq War.
Oh, it is. It's the best Iraq War movie ever made.
And it came out in 90, like it came out 4 years before night. Like it's weird. I mean, I know it's like there's the precedent of like the Gulf of Tonkin, Pearl Harbor. But it's weird. And that moment when they're like, oh, Buenos Aires got wiped out. We're going to kill them all. We're all super pissed. Like that was like,
that's 9/11.
That really was what it felt like after 9/11. Like even in Canada, like it was creepy. Like, oh, we're just, all those people are different and weird and they hate us for no reason. And their only choice is to just bomb them all.
A whole media machine propped up around going to war. Like, and that's also how this movie starts. Like it shows that entire media empire has developed
they're
around
already
the war machine.
Perpetually militarized and ready to fight these bugs before an official war actually breaks out. Anyway, so I just wanted to get that out. Hollow Man.
So Hollow Man, I think it's Verhoeven's cynical take on, more explicitly than Robocop, this is his cynical take on a superhero story. This is a story about a supervillain. And so, well, Hollow Man is his adaptation of The Invisible Man, which we have already kind of discussed a little bit on this podcast.
Yeah, he's Kevin Bacon isn't raped to death by Mr. Hyde.
He's the rapist.
He is, yeah. Which
he's
also
literally a rapist. He literally rapes a woman at one point because
he also is a rapist too in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I think the original H.G. Wells story. He's a psychopath.
So, well, the thing because again, this isn't regarded as a very good movie. Never mind a very good Paul Verhoeven movie. Coming off of several Marvel movies, I just latched onto this thing. Just, again, I know we opened this episode up with the iconic joke that really just is Paul Verhoeven waving a red flag in your face about what this movie is really about. Like, the crux of this movie is, if you got superpowers, you would use them to do the most heinous and worst and depraved shit imaginable. Like,
it'd be
Sebastian Cain is no different than Tony Stark. Like, they are both guys who work for the government, genius scientists, and narcissistic assholes. And Sebastian Cain, when he comes into this superpower, he just uses it to become an even worse person. And which is what Tony Stark realistically would have done. not
Yeah,
be
like a
an
guy
actual
like
hero.
that doesn't become ennobled by getting even more power, generally
No, he
speaking.
becomes a bloodthirsty warhawk. And in Sebastian Cain's case, he becomes a literal monstrous rapist.
Like, it's not like Spider-Man, where it's like a struggling working class kid kind of learns this lesson in the responsibility. And I mean, there's, you can like interrogate that too, but like, you know, powerful people and people that are begat by powerful people. Like, I think as you go up the ladder of wealth and power and status, you just generally become less and less human.
Yeah.
Like,
you don't have to see the consequences of your actions if you have money to pad it.
But I also think like the mentality that produces is more cutthroat and competitive, and like I think it is like the experience of power and status and wealth is dehumanizing itself. Which isn't to say I'm like weeping for Jeff Bezos or anything, but I think it's just kind of like a matter of fact systemic thing. So the extent to which we celebrate people attaining power and kind of put faith in this idea that it somehow would ennoble them further is
ludicrous,
really questionable. Yeah.
Like,
and I think that's the running theme through all these Verhoeven movies is they're always jaundiced towards power.
Power is always the formative figure in Verhoeven movies. Like here in Hollow Man, it's the power also of voyeurism. Like, this is his, like, if Rear Window is Alfred Hitchcock's movie about voyeurism and movie watching 101, that's what Hollow Man is to Paul Verhoeven. I kind of like the effects. I don't know, like early 2000 CG could be very hit or miss for me. Like, it can look very goofy and then it can look very uncanny and doesn't very much age well. But there's just something so creepy about just a guy that's translucent skin. You just see the muscles, the blood veins. Also, is Kevin Bacon's like cock is flopping around, which automatic 4 stars for me for that detail. Thank you, Paul.
Thermal vision dong.
Thank you, Paul.
It's a great. It's a bit too early for what they wanted to do, but it's like the kind of thing where it's like it's like there's a reason like you couldn't do that any other way but with CGI. So like like they get some like, even if they're like the technology's not quite there, they're like striking images conceptually, but there's also a lot of practical stuff to sell it. A lot of props bouncing out of the way and things moving around and cuts to throw. Like, they use a lot of other more conventional techniques to make it work, which now it's like so many movies from this era, you watch a movie now, it's like, well, if they did this, everything would be CGI. The coffee cup he knocks over would be CGI. And it would be less satisfying. But it is like a very creepy, like in a, not a scary, but just a sleazy way movie.
Well, and I also like the fact that the last act of the movie is literally a slasher film.
Oh yeah, that's totally what it's building towards, which makes sense for like post Scream, I think.
Post Scream, and what was this released through? This was distributed through because I know The Invisible Man is a Universal property, so this was produced by Columbia and released through Sony. So I don't know. I don't want to waste time by looking through sort of the production info, but
Universal has like The Invisible Man TM, but the concept, like the H.G. Wells book, is definitely in public domain now.
Okay.
Like the concept you can't really own. And it was funny. I only realized like when I watched it for this, I was like, oh, the title is about how he's hollow on the inside.
Yeah, it's because there's nothing like when. Yeah, again, it's the title. It's just like RoboCop. The title tells you everything you need to know. And then some, if you really dig into it. Like, it is called Hollow Man, not just because he is an invisible man, but because There is nothing but narcissism and desire for power on the inside of Kevin Bacon.
Who's another great choice for like charismatic and winning, but then can like convey the kind of underlying sociopathy.
He's pretty good in this movie.
I have a lot of affection for Kevin Bacon because I another movie I grew up with and adore is Tremors.
Tremors, I haven't seen that in a long ass time, but that was another movie I watched when I was, or at least my dad had me watch when I was probably like 7 or 8. When I was like
I watched young. Again. I watched that movie from being a literal baby. No exaggeration. We wore out the tape. I watched that movie so many times as a little kid, and I guess that's like a PG-13 movie. That's a good, I think, family horror movie where it's like you can kind of introduce a younger person to monster movies and stuff without being overly much for them. That's a good one.
It's a good starter movie. Also, we should probably bring up the fact that Kevin Bacon is cucked by Thanos in Hollow Man, because
it's Josh Brolin.
It's Josh fucking Brolin. Which
actually, I think this movie has in general like a pretty strong cast.
Elizabeth Shue is great. Josh Brolin, not purple and doesn't have a sneaker chin. He's pretty good. Everyone else is kind of not like a bit player, but not like those three are still the like main celebrities that still have like relevance. Like no one really remembers Kim Dickens or Greg Grunberg or whatever.
Those are like you see them pop up in comedies.
Yeah,
and stuff
like here and there.
Like you recognize them. But yeah, it's I guess, is this like the first? Because I feel like Kevin Bacon's had like a string of intermittent villain turns over the last 10, 15 years. Like Super, X-Men First Class.
Wait, Kevin Bacon is in Guardians of the Galaxy?
What? Oh, is it just like like a cameo thing?
Hold on. Or is it might be his character in X-Men who's vaguely alluded to. Well, it says Kevin Bacon apparently is interested in being in Galaxy 3.
Well, I mean, he worked with James Gunn. I guess he's gotten in.
Oh yeah. Well, now that I've looked up Kevin Bacon MCU, I guess people are confusing Ethan Hawke with Kevin Bacon because the Moon Knight trailer just dropped. And I guess Ethan Hawke's playing the villain in that, and people are like, "That's Kevin Bacon." People are like, "No, that's Ethan Hawke. How dare you?" They don't
look that. I mean, they're kind of. I mean, Kevin Bacon, I feel like
they
is
don't
like
look anything alike,
and also like another 10 years older than Ethan.
They're just white guys. That's it. Why? How? Who is confusing Kevin Bacon for Ethan Hawke? What is wrong with you people?
That's really funny. How does that?
This is a white. That's the only reason I can think.
Look, I'm sorry, but that's racism.
That is literally racism.
We don't all look alike. You know, we don't all put mayonnaise on our white bread.
That's what white people do. We don't eat our unseasoned chicken.
Where some of us are good at basketball. Like it's time we set the record straight. You know, some of us can dance. I can't. I actually can't. I do put mayo on my white bread, and I can't play sports, and I can't dance. But you know what? That doesn't mean that you should assume those things about me. You know?
Yeah. Just treat others how you want to be treated, and that's the viewpoint that we endorse on this podcast. And also that Tony Stark was on Jeff Epstein's flight logs. That's the other thing we really try to stress on here.
He totally would be. And you know what? So would Sebastian Cain.
So absolutely. Oh, Sebastian Cain.
He totally would have been. Oh
my God.
They totally would have been getting like some funding from.
Oh, he and Tony would have been like. No, he and Tony would have been like Eiffel Towering some poor girl. Like on the island.
Oh, good Lord.
Like I'm sorry to whoever has to listen to me say that, but like are you going to listen to this and tell me that I'm wrong? Like, they would absolutely have been doing heinous shit on Jeff Epstein's island. Like, Sebastian Cain is just the opposite side of Tony Stark. They're the same character.
As an invisible man, he'd be really good at playing hide the sausage.
Ew. That's ew.
You're the one that gave me the image of Eiffel towering an underage girl on Epstein's island. You can't ew me.
No, I can't. Yeah, I don't have I shouldn't be calling me the kettle calling the pot black or whatever. Yeah, me of all fucking people. We're over here. We've been talking about pervert movies for almost 2 hours.
Well, that's the thing. These movies are honest about it.
They're honest that they're pervert movies.
Thing. Like, you're having. I mean, that's the beauty of like a good exploitation movie is kind of having your cake and eating it too. It's like, yeah, violence is bad. There's all this misogyny and abuse of power, but
you kind of.
But then it's like, damn, that guy got stabbed through the throat. Yeah, that was awesome. And look at these dangly titties.
Like, you need to, like, Paul Verhoeven makes a point of saying, like, you need to see the violence in order to understand its gravity.
Yeah.
And he's never shied away from that. Like, Benedetta is fucking bonkers as shit.
I have it queued up. I am going to watch that, like, in the next couple days.
Delightful.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Just again, like, Paul Verhoeven was the best person to... It was only a matter of time before he made a nun movie. And I am so glad Benedetta is the movie he made. Not my favorite nun movie. Like, future episode, we'll just do a Ken Russell retrospective, and I'll spend 45 minutes talking about the Devils.
I gotta watch Altered States and stuff at some point.
Yeah, but Benedetta is a fucking wild ass ride. That AP reviewer who called it Showgirls in a Convent was a fucking idiot. So much more than that. And we also stand Showgirls, which I imagine we'll probably somehow try to find a way to talk about on a future episode.
Well, I think it would
watch
be
something else.
I think it would be a great way to look at like the decline of sexuality in major media. Like even HBO, even like Game of Thrones, like started to nerf its horniness as it went on. And I'm very I don't have a good explanation for it, but I'm very curious about it. And I think there is something more perverse about a very sterilized, when everything's sort of sterilized and what's a verb
Euphemistic?
for that? Euphemism. Euphemistic, yeah. That's to me more perverse than just laying it out by far.
Yeah.
Like that level of like repression and pretension and like, like, oh, we're going to have like queer possible romances and sexual themes, but it's all layered so deep and it's chaste on the surface. And it's like, there was a time when directors had to do that either because queer themes are unacceptable to anybody handling the money or because it was like the code era and it all was, but like, you don't have to now, except for like fear of controversy and wanting to like make your movie the rating and content level where you think you can get the entire planet to watch it without complaint. And it sucks. Like bring back violence and sex in film. I think the sharp partition between pornography and art has been like bad for our culture, where it's like anything horny is pornography and it's all supposed to be over there siloed away from the rest of human experience and expression, to the point where it's like people point out some bit of classical art or culture is horny and like people get defensive about it. Like, no, it's spiritual and it expresses this and that and the other thing. It's like those things could all very well be true, and that's not mutually exclusive with also just the artist is horny.
Well, also the horniness and the desire to see, if not enact violence, are very innately human things. And I forget who said that Verhoeven is really a great humanist, but he understands that impulse of like the sexual animalistic urge and the desire to see blood and guts splatter all over the place for our own entertainment or to soothe our own sense of vengeance, he understands those are two important components of what makes humans humans, and that they're crucial components of how power works itself through the human body as well.
And
it's the flesh and the blood. He's
totally
flesh and blood.
He's the flesh and blood filmmaker. And that's the thing is Marvel movies have no flesh or blood, or very little. You're like happy when you can detect an ounce of it. And I think too, when it comes to violent sexuality, like we've got these various impulses, the socially conditioned stuff, just lizard brained hunt and kill and fuck stuff. Like, I think it's good to be able to channel that and have a cathartic, fantastical outlet for it, because I think when you try to repress it, when you try to say like, well, if you're good, you only have good impulses and your bad impulses mean you're bad, and you have to make them go away and repress them. Like, I think that pure repression and sublimation leads to them exploding out in uncontrolled and harmful ways. Like that's
why we need Paul Verhoeven movies. That's why we need movies for sickos like you and me.
Absolutely. This is a pro
sicko movie podcast.
Pro sicko movie podcast, not pro Hollywood sickos, which is a totally different thing.
No, we don't support them.
The Hollywood sickos are the ones that make the repressed, bloodless, fleshless, sanitized movies right now.
They're the ones we need to fucking execute or whatever.
We need Hollywood to make a Robocop so we can go rogue and just like kill David Geffen.
Yeah, that would be sick. God, so I'm thinking
allegedly that guy is very litigious. So allegedly in a video game, etc., etc.
Yep, we don't want to get sued. Damn. Well, this has been fun. It's not going to be fun when next time we're going to have to talk about Thor, which is not going to be as fun as this. I can tell you that.
I feel like I'm the one that's going to be Thor after sitting through 2 hours of that.
I liked your joke at the beginning of the episode. All right, guys, this has been the first episode of Watch Something Else sub-series from your friends at Marvelous. I'm Nicole.
I'm Tyrell, aka Stu.
And please, just watch Paul Verhoeven movies.
Watch Paul Verhoeven movies. Watch Robocop, watch Starship Troopers, watch Total Recall, which we kind of skimmed over, but fits right in with those.
I didn't have time to rewatch that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then, sometime, we'll come back, we'll talk about maybe Basic Instinct and Benedetta and
Showgirls.
And we'll talk about the comparative decline of the flesh along with the blood. But yeah, thank you again so much for listening, for supporting the show in whatever ways you have or will do. Hope you're enjoying it.
Follow us on social media. Listen to us we're on iTunes now, which is lovely.
Spotify, I got us on all of them. It took a little while for some approvals and stuff to go through, but we should be everywhere now, pretty much. Especially once this comes out, because we're always recording, I think, like a month ahead of what comes out, basically, at this point.
Yeah, as of right now, I think that's what our release schedule is. But all right, guys, until next time.
Until next time, when we go back to the MCU content mines.
Ugh. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Cheers.